There are few pleasures as soothing and as cathartic as a hot shower first thing in the morning. Blinking into reality every day, for those first few seconds, the world is as unfamiliar as it was the very first time sterile hospital lighting forced open your infant eyes. Perhaps you cry, just as you did then. I won't judge you. But that stream of brilliant, life-giving nectar raining down from the brass fixture each morn brings me wholly back to earth, to this sausage casing of blood and viscera and nerve endings, to my cozy, four-story apartment overlooking the abandoned community garden, untended and overgrown with belladonna and thick, tangled vines. So, you can imagine then that when, in the throes of rebirth, I turn the faucet to searing, and instead of sweet relief, am greeted with icicles tracing paths down my spine, it's a bit like looking at a painting of a sad puppy. Only, the puppy is you. You're the puppy, and he's contracted hypothermia. Congrats! What follows is a lot of inventive swearing, maybe some tripping, and definitely a sprained coccyx. 4 days pass, each as vacant of steamy mirrors on which to draw the Mona Lisa in a handlebar mustache as the last. Initially, I am the model of patience. These kinds of things happen in old buildings all the time. It was a wonder the roof still stood in place. Then, I'm irritated. But nothing a hot shower couldn't. Ugh! Finally, by the 4th day of boiling hot water in empty ramen cups and slowly shoveling them into an ankle-high bath, I've grown sufficiently peeved. What gives? I don't pay an undisclosed amount of money each month to wallow in a puddle. A puddle, mind you, that smells faintly of sodium-enriched chicken broth. Maybe it was finally time to ring that landlord o' mine. In many apartments, the roles of superintendent and landlord are carried out by separate entities. Here and wherever, they are one and the same. Our landlord's quirks, however, do not end there. The unorthodoxy of his business methods make him quite the effective lesser. For instance, he keeps disputes with his tenants low, negatory even, by following this simple philosophy: don't exist. I haven't met the man once since moving in 5 years ago. My application submitted online and payments made through the mail by way of cute-as-buttons octogenarian male person Doris, I was without reason to ever seek out the elusive gentleman. Or gentle lady, though with the name landlord it's hard to tell. Without reason, that is, until now. Until my favorite part of the day, nay, of being alive in the 21st century, is wrenched from my fingertips, but mostly from my pipes. Confronting him, however, is much easier said than done, as I have nary a telephone number for this person who has several important numbers of mine, not the least of which was my cranial size, which I still, for the life of me, don't get. Perhaps he's a hobbyist hatter. If I'm having issues with the water, I can guess my neighbors are too, and maybe they know of some way to contact the uncontactable. One of them has to have a Ouija board. Following the steady buzz of amplifier static, I climb the short flight of stairs up to the 3rd floor and Domino's room. Has the water been frigid for the past few days or what? I inquire. I hadn't noticed, he retorts, scratching a spot behind his ear. Oh, you bathe in cold water then? I've read that can be good for you, I proffer. Nah, he says, and lines of visible odor emanate from the trash heap of a lair behind him. Or I imagine them to. Either way, grody. I turn on my heel and start for Beatrice and the boys, who I feel silly for not coming to first. But upon a few raps at the maple door, tacked with a plastic 3, and crickets, it appears they've all left for the morning. Great. Beginning my disheartened trek back to my room to change for an eventful day of unpacking and repacking the same 10 boxes of plastic-wrapped jewel cases, the bold, black and white typeset that marks the sign to the boiler room catches my eye. I remember then the time my first year in Wherever, when Beatrice, acting somewhat as landlord by proxy, informed me of the 2-ton-gallon boiler in the basement, and the heat it generates, not just for the apartment, but for the also large, though not quite as monstrous, water heater.
It's an ancient setup and one that's bound to fail, even when capacity's low as it's been,
Beatrice predicted, correctly. The extent of my experience with handiwork involves a childhood ambulance ride to the hospital, one of those hard plastic screws they include in toy toolkits, and an exorbitant hospital bill for a pumped stomach. I wouldn't be repairing any 19th century death cauldrons, no siree. With that idea dashed, I spend the next half-dozen hours manning the register at CDs, please, consumed by an apathy that blends the hours into an alt-rock, funk, hair metal goth jazz tapestry. After work, and an unproductive encounter with a customer looking for the most recent Flailing Hips record, inconsolable to the fact that they were broken up long before CDs were the recording medium of choice, I'm still chilled to the core of my being, like my skeleton is encased in a glacier. And not one of those beachy climate change glaciers either. To thaw myself in the soft, hazy warmth of the early summer sun, I walk a circuitous route back to the apartments. I round the corner and head east, past the headquarters for the Wherever Gazette, in print since 1820, Tammy's Toy Town, a miniature recreation of Wherever that, in itself, contains a tiny Tammy's Toy Town, and so on and so forth, Stuff-A-Plenty, the general goods store run by Barnard and his 4 daughters, while the missus, pregnant with their 5th, is on self-prescribed bed rest, and past Wherever's only, yet somehow worst bar, the Snake Boot, topped with a flashing neon sign that alternately depicts a cowboy boot winding back and then forward, punting a comically startled rattler, and its wall plastered lazily with a poster for Mayor Aubergine's re-election that reads, "If it ain't broke, why fix it?" Only it is broke. It's broken, darn it. If I have to be the one to fix it, I'll gather up my Fisher-Price hammer and sickle and bash the problem right ways up. Filled with a newfound determination, I make my way quickly back to the apartment. Upon the discovery that the tool set included with my room is surprisingly robust, I grow excited, if hesitantly, to take this business into my own hands. The march down to the boiler room feels longer than usual, each second sapping my newly gained confidence through the soles of my shoes. The red, gold, and black carpeting of the hallway funnels down into a fine point that no amount of sprinting gets me any closer to the end of. And then, all at once, I'm facing the heavy metal door at the end of the hallway. Almost involuntarily, the knob is in my hand, and I'm twisting against the rusty tumbler, and the door swings back, revealing an expansive void of light that hides even the immediate stairs from view. Cautiously, a toe, extended, and what sounds like a plank of wood as it braces against my shoe. I take several more unsure swipes with my foot, determining the distance between floating slats, and then I enter the boiler room. Before clearing the dreadfully long, creaky steps that descend into the basement, I'm smacked with a wet, grimy heat that covers my forehead and neck with pinpricks of sweat. My palms leave the handrail slick. Looking up, the ceiling is maze-like, shadows of leaden pipes curving at sharp angles here and there. I begin to move forward in the strides of the sightless, unable to decipher the dimensions or the breadth of my surroundings. Navigating is no simple task in this near-pitch darkness. The only source of light, a naked, flickering bulb in the middle of the great room, which swings by a slim length of wire. Jets of steam blast intermittently nearby, sometimes just before my face, as I journey deeper to the room's beating heart. Feeling for and along the roughly textured stucco walls, occasionally wincing as I grab a stray pipe lined with fire, and staring intently at my feet the whole way, I reach an alcove of sorts. In the open space sits a hulking, eggshell-colored contraption. The boiler, I surmise, that, as if taking notice of my presence, grumbles a pathetic grunt. There's a meager flame, no bigger than a torchlight, burning away behind its grill. Next to the boiler, and smaller, though no less intimidating, is the gunmetal water heater, just as Beatrice said it would be. It rests idly. I place my complimentary workbox down, the contents clanking about, and inspect the weary siblings. Now, I'm no electrical engineer, but that doesn't stop me from fiddling, inexpertly, with every bundle of tubes and wiring my fingers can reach. Tools be damned. When my fiddling proves unfruitful, I wipe the sweat from my brow, take a step back, and another comprehensive look at the situation. I establish that the water heater is janked. Its attachment to the boiler is secure, though, and the boiler's connections to the surrounding pipes remain unsevered. I'm officially stumped, and just about to take a pair of pliers to a pressure regulator when I notice something curious. A cable that originates from the posterior of the water heater and leads not into a radiator or pipe network, but a flat wall to its right. A wall that, if my knowledge of the building's layout is up to snuff, should lead nowhere. And yet, the wall isn't perfectly flat, or, as I can just make out if I lean close enough, all the same color. The bulging portion is a lighter gray than the surrounding brick, and at a touch, doesn't leave the same residue of dust upon the finger. I drag a single digit down the edge of the mismatched stone. 2/3 of the way, my finger detects a panel of brick, looser than its neighbors and easily depressed. Without force, with hardly a thought, my hand guides the fixture inward, though only part way, an internal mechanism pulling the remainder snugly into place with a click. There's stillness. Then, a tremulous shaking of the alcove, so slight as to go unobserved by those on the higher floors, shuffling about in serene mundanity. The trembling of the room localizes. The incongruous section of the wall alone begins to rumble, sending flakes and small clouds of clay to the ground as it grinds cumbersomely aside. At first, by a sliver, and then in heaving mists, it fills the boiler room with a murky green glow. Stepping tepidly closer to the newly formed hole in the wall, I'm given barely any time at all to take in the scene. The wide, towering cylinders stacked in rows along the walls of the hidden repository, each burbling near its brim with a liquid the same sickly green that bleeds out over the boiler room, and nestled peacefully, inert, inside every capsule, what appear to be embryos at varying stages of development. some beginning to sprout the seedlings of limbs, others still without eyes and ears, and one, just a tiny, arrhythmically pounding heart, bobbing listlessly, not human, though not quite beast. Off a ways to the right, down a sloped cropping in the cemented floor, sits a long, L-shaped metal table, reflecting that eerie hue back onto the walls, the ceiling, and at places where the light doesn't touch, there are toppling sheaves of papers, equation-scratched notes, medical manuals, and beyond those, beakers and flasks filled part way with unidentifiable substances, at least one of which I could swear is squirming. It's some kind of station. For however brief my panoramic scan feels, it provides time enough for the boxy maroon office chair sitting at the station to swivel. The balding, middle-aged man in it to stand to his full diminutive height, and for him to smile his wicked smile. The silence that follows is menacing. Vibrations and electrical chirps the only ambient noise. And then the silence lasts a little too long and gets sort of awkward. I cough. He takes this opportunity to speak up. "You've uncovered my terrible secret, boy!" "You bet I have!" I bellow triumphantly, his face aquiver with anticipation at my coming accusations. "You've been siphoning off all the hot water!" "Ha! That's right! Hot water! Hot water?" "Yes. I haven't had a good shower in days. Do you know what that does to a man's psyche?" "A laboratory! Packed wall to wall with massive bubbling test chambers, and you're aggrieved over hot water." This line of logic gives me pause, and I think for a second. "You know, the pressure's been a bit low as well." He unhinges his mouth to speak and then closes it, repeating this gesture several times before finally saying, "I'm performing inhumane experimentation in furtiveness here. Is that of no concern to you? Think of the ethical implications. I'm unraveling the fabric of life as we've come to know it, reaping spirits from their mortal flesh and grafting them, screaming to the still gestating fetuses of cows." I exhale a sigh that reaches my knees, and after what feels like 2 consecutive eternities of lectures on the fundamentals of picking the right duvet stuffing, I interject, Look, bro. Ask me again after a good rinse." He is at a loss for words, a sputtering mess. "Don't you even want to know how I came to become landlord, ruler of this decrepit waste bin?" "First of all, I think you might be overestimating the power inherent in the lord part of landlord, and secondly, no, not especially." Thoroughly dispirited, the landlord's expression clouds over. I can't be sure, but it seems as though he's no longer here in the combination boiler room den of evil standing before me. He's somewhere else. Probably on a distant beach where people become appropriately horrified when you reveal your sins against the natural order. This, of course, was not a nude beach he was envisioning, where they'd be right at home with that sort of thing. No, he was checked out. And then, he was back. Eyes burning with the fire of a man reawakened. A man with a purpose and a life renewed. The corners of the landlord's face stretch into a crevice, a soot-black grin straining to meet his ears. Before I can utter a word, his rough, thin hand grasps mine from my side into a feverish handshake. Yes, my boy! You've been an invaluable inspiration! He gives my hand one hard, final tug, his face and eyes darting in opposition, and runs, chuckling wildly up the boiler room steps and out of sight, though I can still hear his high-pitched chortles as he exits the front door of the apartments, and their echoes as he races farther away into the night. I shrug and reach down, locating the cable that runs from the water heater's open-backed chassis to the jumble of unorganized wires scattered across the laboratory floor. It's of a bulkier material than the others, but it comes undone with little difficulty, its odd prongs clanking to the concrete floor. There's a momentary clattering, a steady hiss building throughout the bending pipes, and upon closer inspection, a fire growing brighter in the boiler's grate-covered mouth. Another rattle, and the water heater beside it hums to mechanical life, shaking with excitement. Wait, no, that's me shaking with excitement. I'm going to bathe until I prune like a Shar-Pei. A 2-hour-long soak later, accompanied by the lilting tones of driftwood sack, and calm radiates corona-like from my every pore. The water leaches out with gentle coaxing all of the melancholia, all of the frost. And so, when I see Beatrice out in the hall later that evening, collecting her mail, I'm all smiles. She, however, has had a long, strange day. As it turns out, she'd met our, now former, landlord, also for the first time, but his frenzied appearance was not the thing that startled her. He was, by her accounts, raving about hybrids and man's folly, and by the time she could calm him enough to speak in more than incoherent gasps, he was asking to be locked up. When probed on why, he was quoted as saying, "An evil greater than I could ever conjure already roams these streets. Her name is Modern Comfort." Apparently, he'd ordered 2 additional industrial-sized abomination tanks a week earlier, overloading the water heater and exposing his crimes. By which I mean the crime of depriving me of Mustache Elisa. Let all others be warned. It takes only a week for his replacement to arrive. A plump, kindly-faced man with a full head of fuzzy gray hair and the beard to match, as well as an albino pet tegu he lets roam freely, with a bell tied round its pouchy gullet, of course, and a penchant for Argyle sweater vests. The man, not the lizard. A far cry from his predecessor. For starters, he lives on the 3rd floor, across from Domino, and evidently doesn't mind the constant siege of sound, which seems to mysteriously defy walls and doors. Or he's deaf. In a show of goodwill, the new landlord is turning the old landlord's crazed nightmare circus into a new attraction for wherever's happy, burgeoning children, those both living and life impaired, in the form of a petting zoo. It allows the hybrid manimals a place to roam, food to eat besides nutrient juice, and a life free of gross scientific negligence. At least until they learn to talk. Well, that's just one of the many drawbacks and occasionally upsides to renting an apartment sight unseen and landlord unmet. Sometimes you find a squeaky floorboard or black mold in your kitchen sink. And sometimes your landlord is a mad scientist with a secret underground atelier. Them's the breaks. But what am I telling you for? I'm sure you live in a complex in a town just like this one. It's all the same. Here, there, wherever. This episode brought to you by Nutrient Juice. Everything your captives need to remain technically alive. Nutrient Juice, it's adequate. Bum bum bum. For the criminally disturbed, by the criminally disturbed. Warning, please do not consume nutrient juice until you have been fully indoctrinated by your cult, underground resistance ring, or if you are or may become pregnant.